Hi, I'm Jon Christensen. I teach and do research at UCLA, and I am a producer of the Earth Focus documentary series at KCET and the Public Media Group of Southern California. And I'm an executive producer of The New West and the Politics of the Environment. I'm pleased and honored to be joined today by Senator Harry Reid. Senator, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
You.
Adam Jentleson, former Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Reid, and author of the new book, Kill Switch, The Rise of the Modern Senate and the Crippling of American Democracy, and founder and executive director of the Battleborn Collective. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And Jocelyn Torres, Senior Field Director at the Conservation Lands Foundation in Las Vegas. Thanks for joining us, Jocelyn.
Excited to be here.
Senator Reid, looking forward from the documentary that folks have watched, what are the most important environmental issues to tackle now?
Well, things have not changed the last year, actually. The number one issue facing the world today is climate change, and we can no longer afford to ignore it. It is, we can see here in the Western United States, devastating fires, best represented by what went on in California, which fires that were unheard of. We've had wildfires in Nevada. That's the number one issue facing the world today. And it's number one issue facing Nevada and our nation.
Jocelyn Torres, I'd like to hear your perspective on that same question from the field in Nevada and across the American West when it comes to conservation. What are the most important issues we need to tackle now?
Yeah, I guess I can quickly just say ditto here to Senator Reid. And I can dig a little further. I mean, I think all of those pieces, right, there's layers to that. It's how it impacts, people's lives and their families. Obviously, with the fires, folks are having a hard time finding like homeowners insurance, right, to cover those wildfires. So that affects how much you're paying out, right, of your bills, bottom lines for families. We're also looking right into transitioning into this renewable energy economy, right, to tackle some of these climate issues. And that poses some questions, I know, for groups like mine who focus right on conservation of public lands, because a lot of these big renewable projects are also, being sited in same places that we need for biodiversity protection. So you start kind of layering the big issue of climate and how you pull it out into these individual pieces. And really, I think the big question is here, how do we approach this holistically so that we are conserving, right, the biodiversity that Nevada has so much of, that we're transitioning to this renewable economy, right, and that we're not leaving people behind, especially, low income, indigenous communities and people of color.
Adam Jentleson, as we saw in the documentary, over his years in Congress and the House of Representatives, and especially in the Senate, Senator Reid was able to get things done in the Senate when he was in the minority as well as the majority. Is that era over?
Well, I hope not. I think that many things about that era are over. I think that, Senator Reid, I don't want to speak for him, but, he always had a phrase when I worked for him where he would say, I'd always rather dance than fight, but he was always willing to fight if necessary. And I think a lot of the dancing might be over, at least for now, because I think that we are in an era where partisan polarization is so severe and is far more severe than we've ever seen it before. And we've just seen this recently with Republicans obstructing bills that have broad bipartisan support. And I think that's likely to continue for the foreseeable future. So I think that what we need to have is a different approach to reforming the Senate rules. And I think Senator Reid started that ball rolling in 2013 when he took steps to reform the filibuster when it applied to nominations. And that allowed us at that time to confirm many of President Obama's nominees, both to the cabinet and to the judiciary, who would not have been confirmed if we had not taken that step. And I think that now needs to be applied to legislation. I think the kind of holistic approach that Jocelyn is describing is not going to be possible in this partisan polarized era unless Democrats take an aggressive approach to reforming the rules, because if they don't, Republicans are just going to block all of the measures that are necessary to get us to that holistic place and get us to addressing this massive challenge of climate change that Senator Reid is talking about.
Adam, I was very happy to see the last several months, really, and certainly the last few weeks. You know, I wrote that op-ed piece, New York Times, months ago, where I said that filibuster is not a question if it's going to go away, it's a question when it's going to go away. And I'm happy to see, for example, the organized labor is now making a decision whether they're going to become public and say get rid of the filibuster. Different special interest groups are recognizing you cannot have a democracy where it takes 60% of the vote to get things done. And this has been put on really a fire watch with what McConnell has done to turn the Senate into nothing but a laboratory for approving judges. They did nothing else when they were in the majority. And I think that we as a Democratic Party representing wide-ranging people, especially the independents around the country, the time has come when you start having a real democracy and get rid of the filibuster.
Adam, I know you argue that the Senate needs to abolish the filibuster in your new book, Kill Switch. Senator Reid, right now, senators can put a silent filibuster on any legislation. Would modifying the filibuster rules so that senators actually have to hold forth on the floor of the Senate to keep a filibuster going, like in the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, be a good first step?
John, I believe that you either have it or you don't have it. I think that I have no problem if you could legislate or change the rules, have a talking filibuster. But I think it's doomed to failure also. I don't think it will work. I think that we have to get rid of it. That's what would be the best thing to do. I know there are some saying, well, I'm willing to modify it. I'll take a modification. It's better than what we have now.
It's the dance and then fight, right? Adam, what do you think? Is the talking filibuster a good step, perhaps on the way to ending the filibuster?
Well, I share Senator Reid's view that it basically depends on what happens after the talking. What's the enforcement mechanism for cutting off the talking? And if it still takes 60 votes to end that filibuster, even if you have to talk to use it, you might see the filibuster used less on more minor pieces of legislation, and you might see less overall obstruction, but you're still going to see obstruction on the issues that matter the most, including climate and environment issues. I think Republicans will still be able to marshal the amount of talking that they need, backed up by that 60 vote threshold, to block things on climate, to block things on voting rights that are not directly related to climate, but are probably necessary to make the sustained changes that we need. But I also think that once, as Senator Reid said, once you start modifying it, these things do have a tendency to continue going down that road. And of course, to make any changes, you need to deploy what we hyperbolically call the nuclear option, which is voting by a majority to make a change to the Senate rules. And so even a more moderate change in the rules requires that nuclear option to make that change. So I think that once we start making changes via the nuclear option, we're likely to keep going to a point where we can actually get to a point where we stop things. So I think a talking filibuster with no teeth and with no enforcement is not going to get you to a place where you can start passing the things that we need. But I also would take it over nothing, because in part because it will be an improvement, but also because I think that once senators start down that road, they're not going to stop. They're not going to take all the downside of going nuclear without getting some of the upside of actually being able to pass stuff. So I think senators will continue to make whatever modifications they need to the point.
Adam, I'm also concerned about this nostalgia about the filibuster. I mean, what we're talking about is having a democracy where you don't need 60% of the vote to get things done. I don't think that's too radical. Majority rules. That's a democracy. We haven't had that.
And that is the way the Senate worked for the most of its existence. The use of the 60 vote threshold is only something that's become normalized since the 70s, 80s, and 90s at all. And then, for everything, it became the norm under McConnell. So, if we're going to be nostalgic here, we should think about the way the Senate actually did work, where virtually every single issue that came before it passed or failed on a majority vote basis. Only thing.
Lyndon Johnson, when he was leader for 6 years, he overcame 2 filibusters. During my first 6 years, over 100. So that says it all, I think.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate both of you, and especially, Adam, for taking us down this road a bit to connect what I think is a major issue on the minds of many Americans right now, politically, looking at the political big picture and helping us tie that to the environment. And if folks want more, you should really read Adam's great book, Kill Switch, to understand the modern Senate. After after that, the Robert Caro's book, of course, The Master of the Senate, to understand what came before. And speaking of masters of the Senate, Senator Reid, if the filibuster were abolished, what do you think Congress could do for the environment in the next 2 years?
I think that we have no choice but to make renewable energy something that's more enticing to the business community. You need to have tax credits that are long term. Right now, I was fortunate late one night to get 10-year tax credits, but we need them for longer than that. The business community, to really do its job, needs to be able to plan ahead, and we need long-term tax credits for renewable energy. Sun, wind, geothermal, other such avenues to create energy rather than using fossil fuel, which is so detrimental to our survival as a planet.
Anything else you'd put on the agenda for the next 2 years?
Well, I think there's a lot that we need to put on the agenda. I think, and that Congress is talking about it. I'm so glad that Joe Biden and his folks are talking about it. And that is infrastructure. What is that? We have a deteriorating infrastructure. Our bridges, our dams, our power systems, our roads, highways are really in a bad state of repair. We need to spend a lot of money in infrastructure. It would stimulate our economy and really make our country more efficient.
Jocelyn, what would you like to see Congress do if democracy prevailed, the majority vote prevailed in Congress and the Senate over the next 2 years, not just for Nevada, but around the American West on conservation?
Yeah, I guess I would say, again, to these very short time periods, I feel, and I've worked on bills now for 4 years, 5 years, and they come and they're late. They're solving problems that have been around for all of those years, right? And then we still have another year, years long process through Congress to even get them, signed. I think really thinking long term, right? If you're in a land planning stage where we need the infrastructure and the renewables, right, and the conservation, you're planning 50 years out. You're not planning 5 years, yesterday. So I would say in my ideal world, Congress would be planning ahead of time so that we're catching issues before they become issues. And people, I think when Congress works the best is people don't notice and they just live on in their day-to-day life and don't realize that there was this huge impact because it was a smooth transition for them. And I think, we're at a point now, right, back to the filibuster conversation, right? Folks turned out in droves during a global pandemic to change the way things were being done because they wanted to see action now, right? Not action 5 years from now and have to vote in another, 2 or 3 elections before they start seeing the things that they turned out to vote for in the first place. So I would love them to look forward. And I think, there are senators who are trying to do that. And I think, folks in the advocacy community and voters should help them move that along.
So I mentioned 2 years, of course, because that's the midterm elections. And I think, we see now, I agree with you, Jocelyn, in many ways that, maybe the government is best when we don't necessarily see what it did. In some ways, like SNPLMA, that famous Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act that provided so much access to outdoors around Las Vegas and conservation in the region. And most people don't know about it. They just enjoy the benefits of it. But I think we see right now the Biden administration and others going out around the country to talk about the Recovery Act and the benefits that people will feel because they understand that voters need to understand what government can do, and particularly through the midterms. And I know Battleborn Collective is thinking about this, Adam. What do you think needs to be done over the next 2 years to make sure that happens, on the environment and other issues like jobs?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about something that Senator Ted Cruz of Texas put on social media the other day. He put, I think he was trying to, scare people, and he put a picture of Joe Biden, and he said that Biden's first few months in office have been boring but radical. And to me, I thought that was a perfect encapsulation and probably something the Biden administration might even embrace. I don't think it was successful in the way Senator Cruz intended to scare people or be a negative political frame. But I think that's exactly what we need to see. And I think that's something that President Biden is well positioned to do, where, there isn't a lot of controversy over these things that we need to do on the environment and many other issues. There's not much controversy among the public itself about the need to transition to renewable energy sources, about the need to transition to a green jobs-based economy. When you look at the public opinion polling, there is broad bipartisan support out there in the real world among real people, not politicians in Washington. The only source of controversy is in DC. And so that boring but radical frame, I think, is what we need to see happen here, where, we get rid of the filibuster and reform it to a place where you can start passing things by a majority rule vote. And then I think you'll just see these things start to pass. And, there'll be a lot of coverage and there'll be some controversy. But I think that the way that people digest them and interact with them will be sort of boring but radical. They'll say, "This great. I'm glad we're transitioning to clean energy. We should have done it a long time ago," as Jocelyn said. I'm glad we're transitioning to a green jobs economy. We probably should have happened a long time ago. But reforming the rules will unleash this ability of things to pass that have broad bipartisan support out there in the real world, that are desperately needed, but aren't going to be particularly controversial once they start getting implemented because they are so widely accepted already.
What are the chances we'll see this happen, Adam?
Well, I'd love to hear Senator Reid's thoughts on this too, but my personal thought is that rules reform is more likely than not in the next year, hopefully not 2 years, because I think that the reforms need to happen sooner rather than later, especially on things like voting rights, if they're going to have an impact on the upcoming midterms. I think the reason I'm somewhat optimistic on that is that I think circumstances are going to force the question to a head. We've gotten through this reconciliation process, and there aren't that many more things that can pass with reconciliation, which is an end run that allows a narrow set of issues to avoid the filibuster. Everything else is going to run up against the filibuster. And Democrats, the White House, even holdouts like Senators Manchin and Sinema are going to have to face up to the question, do you just give up on President Biden's agenda and on the things that Democrats need to pass to follow through on the promises they made to the American people? Or do you start to have a serious conversation about reform? And I'm confident that there's enough support for reform that when the question becomes very acute, as I expect it will relatively soon, Democrats are going to choose to opt for reform, maybe moderate at first, but at least start having that process of reforming the rules rather than just give up on these promises that they made. I don't
You know,
think.
Adam, the thing that is always enlightening to me is just to think for a minute. Okay, we have a couple of Democrats that don't want to change the rules. These are people who supposedly believe in democracy. What is there in the democratic process that says that a simple no should stop everything? That doesn't sound right to me. And I think the people of West Virginia and Arizona should be told in no uncertain terms that what is being done by these two senators is contrary to democracy.
Senator, I want to ask the same question to you. What are the chances we'll see this happen?
I believe that, as I've said in writing and said many times in programs like this, it's not a question if the filibuster goes away. It's a question when it goes away. Now, is it going to go away tomorrow? Probably not. But I think we're going to come to a point where the Biden administration is going to have to weigh in and say, if we're going to get something done for American people, we need to get rid of this ancient thing that's been used to stop progress, that is the filibuster. And I repeat, why the nostalgia over the filibuster? It just takes away from the American democratic process.
I want to bring this back for a final quick word from each of you, to connect to something that you've all talked about, that there's widespread support for these environmental issues that Senator Reid worked on, for protecting our lands and water, for protecting public lands, conservation, renewable energy, access to public lands. And the polls show this in Nevada, they show this in states across the country. And I think some of that work, much of that work that Senator Reid, you did over 30 years, showed that those kinds of solutions could be crafted and have support of the people, sometimes even bipartisan support. And I wonder, just a quick last reflection on that to bring this national picture back to Nevada and the American West, starting with you, Jocelyn.
Yeah, I will say, there are bipartisan things moving. Just recently, Senator Cortez Masto introduced Southern Nevada Economic Development and Conservation Act, which was, bipartisan and full delegation support, in a model that Senator Reid showed us could work. And I think we're going to keep moving the things that work, we can keep using those and move it forward. And I think to your point, people in Nevada want to live their lives right day to day. They want to work, they want to enjoy their environment around them. And I think comprehensive proposals like the ones that Senator Reid put together and that Senator Cortez Masto is working on now is what it's going to take to get us moving forward on all of these issues.
John, what you failed to mention, you keep talking about access to public lands. I want to talk about preserving public lands. So one of the things that I'm very satisfied that I did the right thing on is when I became a member of Congress, we had a few thousand acres of wilderness up around the Jarbidge area in Elko County. But now, because of what we were able to get done with the help of a number of members of Congress and President Clinton and Obama, we now have 5 million acres of wilderness preservation in Nevada. 5 million acres. That is so wonderful as far as I'm concerned, because I want to have access to public lands, but I also want to preserve public lands. And I want to throw a bouquet to President Obama for the 2 national monuments he created. Basin and Range, which is 800,000 acres, including the famous Heiser City, the Gold Butte, which is within short distance from Las Vegas, which without the national monument would be destroyed, not on purpose, but people out looking around just would do on their outings around the desert, would unintentionally destroy these beautiful petroglyphs and other things we have in Gold Butte. So I think preservation of public lands is also extremely important.
Thank you. And it was wonderful to be able to tell that story, those stories in the documentary. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, my closing thought would just be that I think, the West has a tradition of bipartisanship in its representation. These issues that we're talking about, environment issues, public lands preservation, these are also areas where there's always been a tremendous potential for bipartisanship. And I think, what you hopefully will see once we reform the rules, if we reform the rules, is actually a restoration of that bipartisanship. That, the 60 vote threshold is an arbitrary threshold, and getting 10 Republicans to join on anything these days, it seems like an impossible task. But once you get rid of that 60 vote threshold, I think what you'll see is the potential for bipartisanship with senators like Mitt Romney of Utah, potentially on issues of land preservation, where you can get a few Republican senators on board and pass something, and that's a major bipartisan accomplishment in this day and age.
Adam, and remember, we established the rule that a simple majority can take care of that.
That's right. That's right. And I think that, that will actually pave the way for going back to more bipartisan cooperation on these issues that should be bipartisan, that deserve bipartisan support, including things like land preservation.
Well, I think we could all look forward to that, and inspired by the history of what Senator Reid, you accomplished in Nevada. I want to give you a last word if you'd like it, Senator Reid.
I have no last words. We've done a good job today. I think we've covered the bases. Appreciate your interest, John. I'm grateful for our friend from North Las Vegas who was very articulate. And Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. And thanks to the DC Environmental Film Festival for hosting this conversation, and our documentary, The New West and the Politics of the Environment, and a lot of other great documentaries on the environment that I hope you all watch. Thank you.